Bees raise queens under very specific conditions. They only raise them at certain times of the year. They don't raise very many of them. They may raise 200,000 workers over the course of a season, but maybe they'll only raise 10 or 20 queens if they happen to swarm. But the main condition with respect to queen production, queen rearing, has to do with pheromones, chemical compounds that are produced by the mother queen that's there in the nest. These compounds are shown on the left. They're called queen pheromones. And the main one is 9-oxo-2-decanoic acid. It's also known as queen substance. And this particular compound does many different things, has many functions. One of its functions is to suppress or inhibit the production of queen cells, shown here, and the queens that are inside of them. So as long as the queen produces a lot of this queen substance, this pheromone, and it gets distributed throughout the nest, the workers won't raise queens. But if the amount of production or the distribution of the queen pheromone gets reduced and disrupted, then the workers will respond by raising queens. So that's an important condition for queen rearing. It's a communication of the queen with all the workers in the nest. She's saying, I'm good, I'm fine, we don't need more queens, and then they respond by being inhibited in producing queens. Queen is a perfume factory. She makes all kinds of interesting chemicals from different glands in her head. She has glands on her back that produce some compounds that suppress queen rearing. Her feet, she has footprint pheromones that she produces, and she walks on the comb and she distributes these pheromones around, and it reduces the queen rearing stimulus. But the main was the mandibular glands in her head that produce this 9-O2 substance, this queen pheromone that I showed in the last slide. And these are the ones that are primarily important for the inhibition of queen rearing. The three conditions that queens are raised in a colony are the swarm condition, the emergency queen condition, and supersedure. Swarming is something that seasonally takes place. In the spring, the colonies are growing and expanding. The workers are out collecting food in the fields, are bringing in nectar, which is made into honey. They're bringing in pollen, which is a protein source. The protein is consumed by the nurse bees and is converted the pollen is converted in their hypopharyngeal glands in their head, converted into proteinaceous liquid that's then fed to the larvae. There's lots of pollen comes in, colony grows, they feed lots of larvae. There's an adult population is getting larger and larger and larger. The queen is producing her pheromone that is from the mandibular glands that is taken up by other workers that are attending to her, and then it's fed to other workers, and in a chain it gets distributed throughout the entire nest to all of the workers. As the nest gets larger and larger, the workers are getting less and less. It's getting distributed more diffusely. And then that's when they start, the inhibition of raising queens starts being reduced. And then you'll see queen cells being produced like these on the bottom of this comb. The colony can produce, as I said, 15 or 20 of these queens, these swarm cells, in preparation for swarming. Again, taking place in the spring. Emergency queens are raised when the queen is lost. It's a fast event happens, the queen dies for some reason, or the beekeeper drops her and steps on her or whatever. All of a sudden, the colony has no queen, and there's no queen pheromone that's reducing or that's inhibiting them from raising queens, and so they will start raising queens. In the case of swarm production, swarm cells, the queen actually lays eggs inside of those cells. So she's basically laying the eggs to replace herself with a daughter. But in emergency queen production, the workers will select a cell that has a worker larva in it, and then will expand that cell, bring it out, and turn it down like these. these were originally just hexagonal cells, normal cells, but then they were modified to make these emergency queen cells, and they'll raise queens in those. Supersedure occurs as a queen gets older. Her production of her pheromone decreases, and it's a signal that, okay, it's time to replace the old lady. They'll start constructing the cells as the inhibition is released or relieved, and the queen will lay an egg in there, and then the workers will raise it, and she will raise her own replacement. And this is a good strategy. You don't want to die at a time of the year where there's no way to replace yourself with what will be a successful daughter. So this is still a controlled event in the life history of a colony. Once the cells are finished, the workers are in control. They establish control. Up until that time, there's a play going, a duet going on between the workers and the larvae, and to get them raised. Once they're sealed, you have a batch of queens sitting in there. You may have, again, 15 or 20 queens, and the workers then control the succession. They don't let the queens out until the proper time comes along. The queens will be chewing holes in those cells, trying to get out. The workers will be repairing those holes, covering them back up, or maybe opening up a hole and then sticking their tongue in and feeding the developed, mature queens that are sitting inside of those cells. But they orchestrate it so that they don't have like one big free-for-all, everybody's fighting at one time. They let them out in a regulated way or in a controlled way to get the proper succession of a queen in that nest.
Den Zelldeckel, reicht den Rüssel heraus, lässt sich von den Bienen füttern, solange sie noch in der Zelle ist, und kommt dann schon praktisch gestärkt zur Welt.
So here you just saw the process of them letting one queen emerge. They were there. They'd opened up the cells and they'd fed her, but they've controlled her to come out. The emergence of this particular queen was under the control of the workers. Once the queens emerge, then there's another kind of communication that takes place, and we call this queen piping. The piping is of two forms. There's quacking and there's tooting. And the quacking and the tooting of the queens takes place between young virgins who have emerged on the comb and the virgins that are still inside of the cells. They quack and toot and they communicate. The communication goes to the workers. The workers are regulating, letting these queens out of the cells. They're also regulating access of queens that have emerged, such as this virgin here, keeping them from going and finding those other cells and cutting holes in them and stinging the developed queens that are inside of those cells. You can hear two different kinds of sounds that are coming through. The first one you heard was the tooting, and then the second one was the quacking. The quacking actually sounds like a quack. And this is a song that's done in the key of G sharp. They've actually measured it and decided this is a G sharp song that these queens are singing to each other and to the workers. In the end, there can only be one. In the end, after the mother queen has left with half of the bees, and the other queens are starting to come out, and they've regulated it all. There's a fight to the death, and there can only be one surviving queen that takes over the nest. At this time, she ages for about a day or two, or maybe 3 days, and then the workers start really handling her roughly. They start trying to push her to the entrance. They want her to get out of the nest and go take a mating flight. So they will stop feeding her as much. They'll tug at her and push her. And then, sometime, usually about the third day, when she'll be pushed out to take her first mating flight. And this shows the bee's activity towards her. And as you can see, they're not letting her back into the nest. They're blocking the entrance. They continue to feed her. They pay a lot of attention to her. But when she gets over here near the edge, over in here, you'll see that they'll start actually tugging on her. You'll see bees coming over and pulling on her feet and acting very aggressively towards her until finally she will fly off and take her mating flight.